Shoutouts, your source for Warhammer Underworlds and under 30 feature token flips. Today, I'm your host, Phil, and with me, as always, lovable co-host, Davy. How you doing, Davy?
I'm good. I'm lovable. How are you?
I'm doing good.
All right.
Enjoying the holiday season. Getting some time off of work. It feels really good.
Yeah, I bet. You've been hitting it hard lately.
Yep. But we're sort of closing in on the finish line for this big push that we've been doing the last few months. So
Cool.
looking forward to more time away from the office.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about my work life. We're here to talk about Underworlds. And for our topic today, we wanted to talk a little bit about hold objective play now that the dust has sort of settled, if you will, for Harrowdeep as a season and the new rules changes and sort of how it's all shaping up for the objective holding warbands.
Mm-hmm.
So should be interesting. But before we dive into that, we do have all of our normal just quick topics. To give you a little bit of context, though, for when we're recording this, we're recording at the end of November. And for those of you who've been longtime listeners, you probably know this is around the time that we started our first episode. And this is now going to be the third year anniversary episode for our podcast here. So, I don't know, feels like a pretty big milestone.
For which we've planned elaborate events to go with it. And by elaborate events, I mean right before recording, I was like, "Hey, hold on, isn't this?"
we've been doing this for a while, I guess. But yeah, so I mean, if this is the first time you're listening, if you've listened to every single episode, either way, we're glad to have you. It's been fun. It's been a fun journey. I'm hoping that we can keep it going strong for years to come. And if you just, want to just communicate with us, let us know how we're doing, give us any sort of feedback, thoughts. If you feel so inclined, joining up on the Patreon, whatever you want to do. But it's been a fun ride. So we hope you hang in there with us as we continue the journey. Moving on, though, so we got our standard community shout-outs. So I actually had some time to read some people's articles recently.
All right.
Crazy. And the most recent one, so I basically read everybody's reviews of the new warbands, which always great to get more people's opinions on those. And then over on the Keep Chopping blog, there's a recent article about resurrecting fighter warbands and sort of a take on how that sort of fits in the game, sort of what the impact is, and I guess it kind of sort of dovetails into a couple different pieces of the game sort of converging with those warbands. So some interesting takes. If you're on the Discord for some of the online discussion groups, there's some interesting discussion around it. I think it's worth a read just to get your own, go into it knowing what it's about, but I don't want to color anyone's opinions. I thought it was an interesting read. I think I would definitely suggest giving it a read, see what you think.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think it's been interesting to see how the design team, Dave Sanders and his crew, are figuring out, where their design space limitations are with all these different things. And I think you can see some of the lessons learned, things like, there's this upgrade now, Heroic End, which has a lot of great buffs. But you can only do it when you're vulnerable. And what they correctly noticed was that this card could be incredibly powerful if it was on a fighter that could be brought back again and again.
Right.
And so what it does is once this fighter is taken out of action, break this card. And so just beyond anything else, I really like watching the development, the kind of evolution of the game where they are learning how to accommodate these different warband styles there.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's nothing new. Like other games go through the same thing. So for anybody who's feeling like there's these pain points in the rules, it's yeah, that's because there are, because that's how games develop. Either you usually start with everything too weak, and then maybe the game's boring, and then it doesn't last. Or you start way too strong, and then you have to like slowly work it down so that you can have this sort of survivable middle ground where you can like have a fun game without everything feeling like it's insane. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's kind of how this game developed. Like shit, some of the stuff in Shadespire was pretty bananas, but we've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and I think the game is better for it.
Yeah, I agree.
Did you have anything you'd like to shout out for this episode?
Yeah, a couple things for me. There's a user who been chatting with a little bit. -1. He's on our Discord among other places,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
he and I were sharing some Eyes of the Nine ideas back and forth, and that was pretty fun. So
Mm.
uh, I realized I had finally gotten them painted in time for me to be done, kind of playing them in the old league. So I brought them out for our past league. I got to. It's always fun to kind of brainstorm some list ideas. And
Yeah.
then also, there's a new battle report channel out. This is, I believe he said Gummy Toot. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I don't know.
But it's the Crit Focus channel. And until I actually watched an episode, I didn't put together that it's like Crit Focus and channel are the size of the magic
Mm-hmm.
dice.
Got it.
That's pretty clever. But I just watched their first one. They got several out. They've got some. They're theming it in a cool way. So they just I watched a one off, but now they're having like the who's the best Stormcast. So big Stormcast off, that sort of thing.
Cool.
And they're coming along, but it was entertaining to watch, and there's commentary, and it's also edited down. So a lot of the downtime is kind of clipped out, which is nice to keep them moving along nicely. So
Nice.
worth checking out and seeing if it scratches that battle report itch for you.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
but just wanted to shout out another content creator.
Awesome. Always great to have more people making great content to go check out. Well, so I will not bury the lead here too much and just say that I have not really had any hobby time other than getting back to actually reading other people's articles. Have you had any hobby time? What the heck's is going on with you, Davey? It sounds like you finished painting some Eyes of the Nine, and then
Yeah,
anything else?
they've been done for a bit, but I never got to feel them, so I got to bring them out
Mm.
for the first time. That was fun. Got to get out to our league night, so I brought Eyes of the Nine and the Godsworn Hunt, a couple powerhouses from
Oh yeah,
Night Watch season.
you know.
But what it was, I was like, I want to try some of his eyes. I like to try to bring a couple warbands out to league night so that I can ask the opponent, like, hey, would you prefer to play one or the other, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
because we got. And sure enough, my second game was against Jazz, and I was like, hey, I got Godsworn or Eyes, and she's like, ugh, I hate Eyes. It's like, well, all right, Godsworn it is. So we
Nice.
had a incredibly bloody, like 20 minutes and done match with
Yeah.
Godsworn versus her Crimson Court, which
Oof.
included and people who are on the Discord I probably already saw this, but they're using a push. I was able in the first round to have Grundon. I'd scored one glory off of something passive, like everything to prove or something, and so I put Feral Symbiote on him, so he's doing 4 damage once he's inspired, and
Mm-hmm.
he swung at Velis, missed. Swung at Velis, missed. So now he's already got 2 hunger counters. He's already taken a hit, so he's got 2 damage. He's got 1 life, one health left. But then played Mighty Swing, ran into a crowd where he could swing on 3 different vampires.
Oh no, you didn't, did you?
The first one was Ennius, who I think I got a crit on him, and then he critted to defend, so I knocked him back. But then I killed Velis and killed Prince Duval, and then of course that was my 3rd hunger counter, and Grundon fell over dead. So for me, it scored the 2 kills, primacy, clean kills, and fallen titan. And for Jazz, that was my 3rd person down, which scored Bloody Hunt or Red Ruin. Red Ruin
Yeah.
is the
Mhm.
objective, and also like led her into another one. So there's like we added up. There was like 10 glory that scored between the 2 sides combined off that one activation, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah,
So
that's the fun stuff. That's why you go out and play these games.
that's why you
right?
go
I
out
mean,
and play. Yeah, it was
like
great. So we got
Always,
to do
always
painted
the crazy
unpainted.
stuff.
So
Nice.
and then on the side of I'm almost done painting Grimwatch.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, I'm going with a pale scheme. I wanted to try and do real pale flesh and then kind of lean into the bloody hand sort of thing. I
Yeah,
have not yet gotten
solid.
into the real gory, bloody part yet, which is a little scary because I'm starting to feel better about how they look. And like, am I really going to just like slop a bunch of blood all
Yep,
over these now?
exactly what you're gonna do.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I mean, that's one of the fun things about painting the warbands is I can try things that I wouldn't try on an army, like try out a new technique or a different color palette, all that sort of thing. So fun stuff. But
Yeah,
yeah, so plenty of stuff going on for me.
sweet. All
Yeah.
right. Well, and some of those warbands kind of ties into what we're going to be talking about today. And
Yeah.
so, objective play. So the main thing that we are hoping to just talk through here is mostly that like the way the whole objective play works is highly impacted by the new setup mechanics in
Yeah.
delving. So we wanted to like have a discussion about that, but we needed to kind of give it some breathing room because there's a lot of hot takes immediately
Mhm.
out of the gate. But it's like, no, should wait, see how it actually works, play with it, and then can sort of give some background. But so for those of you who maybe don't have Harrowdeep yet and aren't as familiar with these new rules, Davey, would you want to run the people through delving and how the new objective placement does impact the game now?
Sure. We'll just talk for a second about what the actual rules are, and then we'll talk about where that actually, what the implications of that
Yep.
are. So,
Yeah.
delving is something that happens during the power step, and when it is your turn to play a power card, you can delve instead of playing a power card. Each feature token can only be delved once per player per power step.
Yep.
So you can flip it once, and then you, with short of using a power card, it will be stuck in that, or unless the other player can somehow get onto it, and then they can flip it in that same power step with a delve. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then objective placement, a big thing there is that no objective. It used to be that your fifth objective could be placed on an edge hex no matter what.
Yep.
And then if somehow the field got so restricted before that the fourth could potentially be placed. I don't know that I ever saw that happen. I think mathematically it was probably possible, but
Yeah. There's probably like
it's
one configuration of every
of
situate.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
you had it
It,
set it perfectly for that to ever be possible.
sure. But now that caveat, you can only place that fifth one on the edge hex if there's no other valid spaces. And even that is pretty hard. So what that means is that you can't just set your board uh, and expect to be able to throw one way in the back line.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Interestingly, as well, this actually also applies to the the two tokens that go afterwards, the ones that are gloom on both sides. Those don't end up in edge hexes either. The only restriction they get to ignore is the can be placed within two. So
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I mean, like objective placement has always been a really important part of playing hold objectives, and to a lesser extent, it's still a very important part of the game in general.
mhm.
Um, and like it doesn't when you read it, it's like okay, that makes sense. It's like a small change, but it's like oh, the math or like how close all the objectives end up being once they have to be set that way is striking.
Yeah,
Like you really just have everything so much closer together,
yeah,
and you can really get forced into where you're allowed to put your objectives. Like you really
hmm,
have to be careful, otherwise it's like oh, I guess there's like literally one valid spot left for
yeah,
this thing to
yeah.
go. um that was
I
definitely something that caught me off guard when I first started like setting up boards and actually seeing it.
100%. I it felt like learning, like if you learned how to drive, it felt like all of a sudden you're in a country that drove on the other side of the road, right? Like so
Mm-hmm.
some things were transferable, but it took a lot of like, okay, hold on, like I really need to think about this. And we've said it before. I if we get the chance to go to uh, a big tournament or something like that, and I am if I choose to bring a hold objective warband, what I do is probably sit down, like maybe you and I sit down and we just place boards for for 20 minutes. Like, okay, I'm gonna place boards and objectives. Now let's kind of work through the different ways that you can manipulate a given board or setup.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot to figure out, like trying to protect good spots versus disrupt them. Trying to figure out how, because the old skills that you had, there's some that transfers, but not everything. And I think you're right. I think a lot of the objectives are much more forced into the field of play, um, which feels kind of shaky, right? Like, from the hold objective perspective, like for those of us who are used to saying like, oh, you goofed up. Now I've got three, like almost all the way at the back of my board. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's very unlikely to happen. And they can be disrupted. So you can hold objectives, but you better be ready to fight over them.
Yeah, for sure. So that's just a basic rundown of the new rules themselves. So some broader implications, some further discussion. I guess where would you like to start, Davey? We can
Well,
talk about
I mean,
a
we were
bunch of
kind of
different
already
things.
talking some of the implications of objective placement. So let's stay with that for a little while longer.
Sure.
Um, and one thing we didn't mention here is that you get dealt your objectives, and so what
Yeah.
numbers you're
No,
placing,
that's
but you
true.
keep those hidden. So you don't know how the numbers are distributed that your opponent placed, and you do know how the numbers are distributed with what you've placed. And then that information is not revealed to the opponent until those start getting flipped, which can be a significant amount of time. Now, there's not a ton of cards that objectives and such that really care about the numbers, but they're out there, and it's worth considering
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to deck building. So,
Yeah. I think there's like I think in terms of objective scoring, it's not really a thing. Like I don't think I've seen anybody who's started to run like a whole specific number
mm,
objectives again. Like that
yeah,
doesn't appear to be a thing
right.
yet. But there's power cards now that it says like a a token of this number do a
Mm-hmm.
thing, or I guess Grimwatch have theirs where it's
Well,
score for
yeah,
holding the one in the round.
I was going to bring that specific example up because when we were first looking at the rules changes, I thought about this. I remember saying like, hey, it's kind of cool. Like if I get my three, say I'm a Grimwatch player and I have Shifting Madness, which is the surge for one glory if you're holding an objective that has the same number as the round number.
Yep.
Um, if I, as I'm placing, and this is before I've seen my objective hand, I can look and I say, okay, if I've got 1, 4, and 5, I can make sure that 1 goes to the back of my board rather than to the front, so it's in a more protective space. Or same thing, 1 or 2 or
Mm-hmm.
3, I can put that in a beneficial area. And I was like, I think this might actually be a benefit. Here's the thing though, like you don't know the other two. So let's say you draw,
Yep.
3, 4, 5. 1 and 2 are on the opponent's board, but you don't know which one is which. And some of those there's like you have to go dive on and just hope you dove onto the right one. So uh,
Yeah.
in practice, I think it's hurt those folks who really want to be able to interact with a specific objective number, just because there's uh, the information gain you have at the beginning is not as much as the information lost by not being able to see what your opponent has. And what I found in trial was that while it wasn't suddenly a terrible objective, Shifting Madness was a lot harder or a lot riskier. I felt like um,
Yeah.
it can already be tough when you can't control which objectives end up in opponent's territory, and now you don't even know which is which over there. So I think that's kind of a knock on from the new placement rules.
Yeah. And I mean, it's an interesting side effect, right? I mean, it's like, oh, suddenly the the action efficiency, just by the nature of not having all the information,
Mm-hmm.
just means like I could just completely waste an activation,
Yep.
and that
Yep.
is usually something you can't afford to do.
Right. Totally.
So very interesting change, something that I don't know that I've seen anyone else talking about, but I think is definitely a, like you say, it's a bigger deal than maybe we initially anticipated.
Yeah.
And I guess that does uh, sort of like like you were saying, it lends itself into some card selection and some new consideration with different cards. And there's other things as well, but so I mean, I guess like you already mentioned that there's the infaction for the uh, Grimwatch, that they have Shifting Madness. There's
Hmm.
also the
Tactical
Mournflight.
supremacy.
There's Tactical
Oh, more
Supremacy.
flight.
There's
Yeah.
Mournflight. They have Holding Even and Odd, and
Hmm.
if you don't know, that could be tough as well. So, I mean, all of those types of cards suddenly get harder to use.
Hmm.
We also have a, I think it's just the one for power cards that we've got Living Land. Um, so Living Land specifically says that you can flip an objective hex of like a number that matches the round. Um, and that, I mean, there's actually a couple implications there, but first and foremost, you now maybe don't know which ones are which number, so it's harder to rely on getting the right one to be able to flip. But then also, it's not an objective token until it's been flipped once. So, a couple things there. Kind of, I don't know. It's a interesting situation to be in with having some staple cards like that suddenly not as viable as they used to be. I definitely still have Living Land in my uh, Starbloods deck, and I'm actually just thinking about it now. It's like maybe I should be taking it out. I don't
Right.
actually know that it makes a ton of sense. I think the games that I've played with it so far, I didn't really end up getting a lot of use out of it.
I've not included in any objective deck that I've built so far, specifically because of that. Like, the number may be a non-factor, and the other side of it, which is to move the token while powerful, needs it to be an objective before it can be moved.
Yeah.
And it's possible you're going to have that and just be a dead card. Um, so uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think when we're talking about cards, we're talking about a number of things that we're paying attention to in ways that we might not have before. Like you said, referring to numbers, but it's important to look. Are they talking about feature tokens, or are they talking about objectives? So
Yeah.
anytime you see one of those cards, check that piece, and that'll tell you uh, whether how useful it is for interaction there. Um, there's other infactions. Like one of the cards that for a long time felt like one of the more powerful cards to me was in Chosen Axes, the Treasure Lust, where you could push a fighter 3 spaces
Mm-hmm.
as long as they ended up on an objective. Well,
Yeah. Now what?
now that token has to be flipped before it can even happen, and man, the value of that card just dropped. Um, any card that's flipping in general, the it used to be, for a while, like the ability to flip an objective was extremely rare, right? Flipping a
Yeah.
feature token was few and far between. Then we got more and more of those, but it's still like if you still collected like every card across the board that talked about flipping, it was still a pretty finite pool. But now
Mm-hmm.
anyone can flip as long as they're standing on a feature token, they can flip it. So, in economic terms, that just like plummets the value of a flip basically. Like
Yeah.
it's
No,
real
for
hard
sure.
um to flip and keep it flipped. So because if you're flipping an objective underneath somebody, they can delve it back at any power step. So they have lots of opportunities to undo any work you do. And so you really need a compelling reason to bring a flip in if you don't. So for that purpose, I was like, RIP Geomancer's Gauntlet, because who's going to spend an action now to flip something, right?
Yeah,
Like,
no, I definitely not. Um,
um,
I think the only reason that you would is if you could do it from range. And I think the only mechanic that does that is with the Starblood Stalkers. You can have Kishitaka flip it from 3 hexes away,
mhm.
which, I mean, it's still niche. You're not going to do that all the time, but maybe.
Sure, yeah,
um, but yeah, I mean, it's not great. So while flipping in power cards loses value, flipping in general does it still have some value in terms of needing to use it as a defensive tactic as well? Or I guess maybe offensive, in the sense that people are now hiding in these tokens just as much as they are trying to hold them.
Well, that gets into some of the mechanics, and we didn't talk quite as much. This is a good time to talk some about delve. The other thing
Sure.
about delving is that it's also a stall. We've talked about that. So, but as
Right.
far as
Yeah.
offensively, I think that's fair to say. So if you're in a cover hex, you're getting double supports now count as successes on your defense roll. As we said before, that's particularly handy because there's not a cleaver and snare that knocks out supports.
Right.
Um, and with Dire Chasm's update of supports, there's not even that, supports canceling, all that sort of thing. So that's not even on the table here. Um, and so there's the timing. Like how long do I want to keep my defensive benefit
Mm-hmm.
versus how long, at what point do I need to flip it to have it take effect? So like the most basic math of this would be you want to wait as long as possible to flip it. One thing we didn't even mention is how this affects surge hold objectives. So
Yeah.
even though Temp Victory has expired, we still have factions like Grimwatch or the Grashrax Despoilers that can
Mm-hmm.
surge for 2 to hold 3. There's other factions have similar things like that. Those objectives are slowed down, so the value on those is reduced, possibly to the point where I don't know if they even need to be restricted anymore. It's hard to say. I
Yeah.
think more information needed, but
Yeah. I think it's worth a discussion, because it's like, so something that I noticed, because I still had some of the surge hold objectives in my decks when I was playing, and I was finding that it's like, in order to even score a lot of these surge hold objectives, it's like I have to basically set this up ahead of time, because I have to have, I have to have already flipped it and then move on to it to be able to score. And so there's a full turn delay. And so, like, you can still score it in the round, so it's still better than an end phase, but sometimes the reward isn't as high.
mm,
And so then it's like, well, am I gaining as much as I need? Like, would it make more sense to just take passive hold, like surges, instead of hold objective surges?
mm,
Um, which is a weird thing to feel. And there was definitely cases where I was like trying to do the math in my head of like, okay, if I have this many turns left and I have these cards to score, and I need to flip these tokens first to be able to score them, like, do I even have enough actions to be able to do this?
yeah,
And it's just something you never had to think about before.
yeah,
Um, and I think that's maybe the only situation where I was like, man, I wish I had a way to flip these with a power card. But like, it just, once they're flipped, you want them to stay flipped. So then
yeah,
it's like, now I don't really care. And like, I don't know, it just leaves your power deck in a weird spot. So,
yeah. So yeah, it's totally right. You either have to flip it before going so that you can score it in the one activation, or you have to move on, delve it to what you want it to be, and then hope that you stay on there.
yeah,
Or you can move on, wait to delve until your next activation. But basically, it either requires power card expenditure or it requires you um, to basically it slows it down by a turn where somebody has a chance to do something about it.
yeah,
You could theoretically force somebody's hand with that. Like if I see Grimwatch move, they're sitting on 3 featured tokens. I'm like, okay, well, they're only one delve away, one round worth of delving away from scoring this. Now, do I commit and throw in and try and hit one of these little ghouls, or do I shoot my shot and try and get Gristlewell down, or like it? You
right.
can try and, but it's clearly less powerful than it used to be. So
Yeah. And I guess we kind of mentioned this, but just to hammer it home, like that timing, battle that you're sort of waging in your mind of like, when do I need to flip these? What's the timing that I need to figure out? If your opponent isn't playing hold objectives, they don't have to think about it at all. And
mm,
like, to them, it's like, oh, you're just taking away your defensive buffs. Okay, cool, great. That just makes it that much easier for me to come and hit you.
yeah,
Um, which I think, I don't know, it'll be interesting to see. I haven't checked any of the tournament results lately to see like how our hold objective decks playing, but my feeling is that aggro is in a much better spot right now.
Mm.
Um, and like I said, don't have any data to back that up because I haven't double checked that. But it's like you just there's there's benefits to just standing around in feature tokens for aggro, and it gums up the works even more than for the hold objective player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's worth one. We'll talk some more about which cards have kind of gone up or down in value. But there may be this thing where now your hold objective. I mean, everything's always a little bit hybrid, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
very few decks that
Always,
are
yep.
just 100% of something. Even in their heyday, a lot of Grimwatch decks were hold objective in their objectives and gambits, but aggro in their upgrades, where
Yep.
they get that glory and then counterpunch hard with their upgrades. It may be more hybrid than before now, where uh, do a lot of killing and along the way pick up some objectives like by standing on them as well.
Yeah.
In general, like the easiest rule of thumb for you is to wait as long as possible to delve. If you think that you're going to be trying to combat something like uh, dominant position or something like that, where you think that maybe I do need to hold some objectives, but waiting till the last possible minute could leave you open to power cards flipping, because you end up delving to try and deny, and then somebody managed to pull off. Maybe they did bring a flip gambit, flips
Mm-hmm.
that back to lock it in. So
Yeah. We're looking at
if
you,
you
Hrothgorn.
yeah, if you can do it though, if you can do it like one power step before the end, that gives you a buffer, and
Yep.
then it makes it pretty hard, because if you're already standing on an objective, you can leave it as is, and then even if they flip it, then you'll be able to delve it back. So I think that feels like a thing that you do much more in game 2, or if you have a really good idea of what the opponent's deck is doing,
Yep.
is creeping that back. Just a little head game to keep in mind.
Definitely. Well, since you mentioned it, should we talk through some of the cards that we think have maybe lost value and gained value along the way here with some of these changes?
Yeah, sure. We talked about some of these already, but with power cards, we're looking at, if it's something that flips, it's probably gotten less valuable. It's got to have some other redeeming quality.
Yep.
If it's referring to objectives and not feature tokens, not so much. On the other hand, like, I think if it specifically refers to feature tokens, its value may have gone up before, because lethals were feature tokens, I believe,
Yep.
before,
Yeah,
although
I
we
think
didn't usually
so.
think about it because you were almost never voluntarily pushing onto them.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and so now something like Symbiote's Call, I feel like has gone up. It's a push, and now at the start of the game, there's 7 feature tokens out there that don't damage you for getting pushed into them,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and so that's a little more wide open than it was when it was just 5 and then 2 lethals. And Symbiote's Call, both sides of it, both options, that the push and the flip refer to feature tokens. I think
Yep.
Symbiote's Call retains pretty good value for them.
I think so too. I think Symbiote's Call has become a powerful card and basically a solid replacement option for Living Land. If you think that you still need to have that push effect and a flip
Mm-hmm.
effect.
Yeah.
Um,
Cunning Paths was one that
yeah, it does a
it's not
similar
an
thing.
upgrade, but it's a gambit. It's so this is a card that will give you +1 move to all your fighters. So if you're someone like Manok, who is potentially triggering multiple moves in a single round, a little extra to be gained from that. But then it also, if you have a quarry, they can flip things as they go, which actually gives you an opening. If you can use that, if you also have quarries out, it can give you the ability to score some of those surges that we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. So
Definitely. And we already mentioned anything that's taking an action to flip is probably not good anymore. I think anything that is like a conditional flip. So we've got Great Tremors, which is just like sort of a Yahtzee style. You roll
yeah,
5 dice and see if you get any crits, and for every crit, you can flip a feature token. I don't think that card probably holds a lot of value anymore, just because it wasn't likely to happen anyway, and now people can just reverse it really easily. And then there's also a spell card that can flip that's new with
You're
Sandire.
thinking of
Light of Azir.
oh,
So
yeah.
flip one feature token that is not an objective token within one hex.
And is that's a spell action? Is
Yeah,
that
it's a
yeah,
spell action on an upgrade. And it's just
yeah.
like, I don't think I care to do that.
Yeah, there is a existing gamma spell, Mazig's Machinations. Was a
Yes, that
focus
one
and
too.
flip all features within 2 or 1 feature in no one's territory or 1 opponent's territory. Those as for the things that flip, like you were talking about with Great Tremors or Mazig's, I think you have to have a specific reason for including. I don't think they stand on their own necessarily, specifically
Mm-hmm.
because of the counterplay. But for example, I had Mazig's in. I put Mazig's in my Eyes deck. It is in there for a couple of reasons. One is that we've got the myriad incantations, so having some spells in
Sure.
there creates an
Okay.
easy thing to score. And then a very powerful card, which actually lost a step, is Deceitful Step, because
Right.
Deceitful Step is going to send you to a starting hex or an objective hex. But if there aren't objective hexes out there, then nothing happens if you roll
Yeah.
that side of it. So giving yourself a landing spot in enemy territory can be pretty important for that. And that's a powerful enough combo that the situational, hey, I managed to flip something out from under somebody if
Yeah.
they didn't time their delve
It's worth it.
correctly. I think all those things add up to be more useful. Maybe you include something that flips if you are uh, if you are running something like Chosen Axes and want to be able to use that powerful push Treasure Lust. So
Yeah. Yep.
um, an upgrade that it doesn't actually flip anything, but I think maybe loses a step as well, but is maybe still powerful enough to include is Quickening Greaves.
Yeah.
And Quickening Greaves specifically because a lot of times you'd use it, hey, I'm going to get somebody who's adjacent to an objective at the end of the round is going to manage to step back onto that objective. But they're doing it here. They're making that step after the delves have happened, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can't just use it to step onto a Gloom Hex and then count on that Gloom Hex getting flipped over. Now, it may still be good enough to use otherwise, but
Yeah.
it loses a little bit there.
It's more of a distraction protection, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
you can't use it to gain an extra hex, but you can use it as an insurance measure now
Mm-hmm.
to get back on. Sort of in that same vein, and maybe even has more applications now. I feel like Confusion has suddenly sort of
I
had its
I
stock
agree
come
with
up
that.
quite a
Yeah, I
bit.
mean, to me, if you're trying to hold objectives, that's maybe a must include.
Yeah.
Specifically because a lot of what's happening with hold objectives is people are vying for that dominant position is still a very strong one, and that's a
Yeah.
2-point swing there, and people are going to be attempting to block that. Confusion there's a big swing in that.
Yeah, and I mean, if you can, as an aggro warband, end up on a Gloom Hex, why wouldn't you, right? You're giving
Mm-hmm.
yourself a 1/6 bonus to your defense roll. So there's the potential for people to just be gumming up the works with ranged fighters because they know this is just a better spot to end up in.
Mm-hmm.
And then, especially if they know they're denying you from scoring as well, they're probably just likely to hang out on the
Mm-hmm.
feature tokens. So having
Yeah,
a way to, you know, get on and remove them from one all-in-one card, I think has gained a lot of value.
sure. There's one card that I'm interested to see more of, and I don't know what to think about this. And this is Writhing Shadows. Are you familiar with this one?
Yeah, I think so, but you should definitely read it again and make sure I'm remembering.
Sure. So this is a gambit. It came out with the Harrowdeep box, and this is a pick
Hmm.
one. Flip one feature token in an empty hex, or roll one attack dice for each fighter in a cover hex, and on a roll of hammer, deal 1 damage to that fighter.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a weird one for me. So there's that flip, which may be useful. It's in an empty, which at first when I was looking at anything that was flipping in an empty, I was like, well, that doesn't even hardly matter. But on the flip,
Yeah.
like it's about as useful as the other because flipping in an occupied often means that they're just going to delve it right back. So this
Mm-hmm.
lets you kind of flip something over. And if you are doing something like that deceitful step, or, you know, uh, God forbid, labyrinth boots, like the things that want to see an objective before they
About
go
Masters of
there,
Space and
it can
Time.
unlock those. But mostly on this one, right, in Masters, there's the damage, this kind of splash damage.
Yeah,
If you're only trying to get it on one person, not great odds. But as soon as there's like two or three or four, uh, you can actually splash out a lot of damage with this,
yeah,
with the right roll. So 1 and 3 on each of those. And I don't know if it's powerful enough to like dissuade people from going on to cover hexes. So um, the more cards we see like that, the more complicated some of these decisions become.
definitely. And I think I would imagine that we're going to see more cards like that. And so there's probably
Yeah,
going to be this sort of push and pull of like how much can I rely on gloom versus how
yeah,
much is it going to hinder me if I do
yeah.
rely on it. So that I think I agree, and that's definitely going to be interesting. Um, does Writhing Shadows have any range restriction? It's just flip an
No,
empty
just pick
hex.
one anywhere. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess I had sort of read it and been like, that's probably not that great. But now that you mention it, I think that needs some testing because that sounds like it could be pretty useful.
yeah. As we talk about it, it's worth mentioning that feature tokens include those objective hexes that are gloom on both sides. So you can technically flip those or delve those.
Mm-hmm.
There's very corner case. Well, I can see delving them to stall for time if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Um, I flipping them for any other reason feels hard to wrap your head around, uh, unless, and this depends on exactly how this gets ruled, but things like Arm of the Everwinter, which score for flipping or destroying an objective.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's another one out there.
It's the
Astro
Astro
Matrix
Matrix.
alignment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does that count as your warband flipping it? I think it'll probably end up being yes, but it's technically not an action or a card that did it. So hard to say. I can see why
Yeah.
people have it up for debate. So um, anyway, that's me getting on a tangent of a tangent of a tangent. But
Yeah.
yeah, the cards I'm interested in seeing is more of this Writhing Shadows. Like what happens to that? How do we continue to make these feature tokens interesting and give you more head games to play around with them? Um, I think it'd be cool if they did something. Like there's definitely thematic things you can do with light and dark, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
uh, burst of light or something, and all objectives in one board or something get flipped, or flip all feature tokens in one board, or do something that restricts the delve. Say like uh, you know play a card and now fighters can't delve for a round or until the end of the phase. I think
Yeah. I,
maybe there'd be a waypoint, like we've seen one waypoint card. Maybe there's a waypoint that restricts your ability to delve in a round or something like that. So
would definitely be cool. I think there's plenty of good ground to try things out in. There's lots of new space to explore in. So I'm certainly excited for that. I think it should be pretty good. Um, so yeah, that's a lot of power cards that we've talked about and some of the reasons that stocks are up or down. Uh, how about objectives? What sorts of things do you think are losing value? What sorts of things do you think have become better? What sorts of things do you think need more experimentation?
So I think we already mentioned. I think maybe the first objective you have to mention we've done is dominant position. I think it remains really strong.
Yep.
It's an end phase, so it's not really affected nearly as much. It doesn't care about the numbers; it just cares about standing on them, and then you can delve at the appropriate time and make sure you control them. The only head game here is if one of the warbands does have flip tech, making sure you delve at an appropriate time, sort of
Yeah,
waiting until the last possible moment, but not too late to do that.
definitely. And at
Um,
least from my experience, like dominant position has become almost easier to score than it used to be because there's
mm,
just so many fewer objectives that if your opponent wasn't delving and aren't necessarily thinking about it, It's
Hmm.
like, oh, well, I hold one objective and I score dominant position. Like that's
Hmm.
feels pretty brutal sometimes.
I think there's a huge boost for any objective that says hold all of objectives in X territory. So it might be all the objectives in one territory, all objectives on the board,
Yep.
um, because it's likely. I mean, it's that situation that the Gits would sometimes attempt to exploit, where if they got enough flips and destroys, they could hold the only one. So things like infestation or claim the city
Yep.
are those are like the big 5 pointers, and that's where you start saying like, yeah, maybe it is worth bringing some flip tech if I can get this to go off
Yeah.
uh, a 5 glory objective, that's possibly worth investing in your power deck.
Yeah. And a 5 glory that is just an end phase. It's not a third end phase. Like it
Hmm.
is probably game ending if you manage to score that in like round one or something, because
That's a
you're just going to be way ahead.
pretty huge boost. Uh, but one that is universal, and I think you're going to see a ton of, is scant resources. And I think you're going to see this. I think I say you're going to. I think you are already seeing this, even in hybrid decks, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is all objectives have to be held, and
Yep.
so it can be as easy as you're the only person who delved, and so there's one objective and it's delved, and you scored scant resources and dominant position off of it.
Yep.
Um, this also represents, it's almost like a counter pick. So if you think the other person is going for a dominant position, or if you think the other person is going to try and stop your dominant position,
Yeah.
this has some extra insurance in that arms race. Um, we were talking about ways to use Manok. Uh, if you can use his moves, you can not have to burn an activation moving somebody onto an objective to delve that and then step off to deny somebody else scant.
Mm-hmm.
You can find a way to use his cunning ability to run somebody on that as a reaction, and then even run that person forward again to keep him in the mix, which also clears that objective off. So not only is it delved, but it's no longer occupied. So if you're trying to counter scant resources, you've got that as a possibility. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of just interesting play now where it's like, well, how am I going to get onto all of these to do the flips, and how am I going to do it in the most efficient way possible? Obviously, warbands that, already have easy ways of just like pushing fighters or moving multiple fighters at once can just kind of do it. Uh,
mm-hmm.
but you sort of have to get creative now. I feel like push tech is even, I mean, it's always been important. It's always
Mm-hmm.
going to be important, but it's almost
Mm-hmm.
more important now than it maybe even was before.
Sure.
Um, Another one that I have been playing with just because it felt like it could be such a huge swing that you used to almost never consider was making a statement.
Yeah.
Another universal one. It's a 3 point swing for holding all of the objectives. Um, but if there's only like one or two, you just hold those and you get 3 glory.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
pretty good.
specifically holding all objectives in enemy territory, right?
Right. Yeah. It has to
Yeah.
be an enemy territory. But if
Yeah.
if there's only the one or something, you just run somebody into enemy territory and flip the one. Then,
Yeah.
uh,
This is doable, and this is like big time argument for confusion, right?
yep. Yep.
Uh,
Huge.
somebody's attempting to step on some, maybe delve them to deny dominant position, and then you drop somebody in confusion, and that's the kind of play that hold objective decks have traditionally loved, because there's not dice involved, right? Like
Yep.
that's, I just want to be standing in the right spot. So
Definitely.
uh, that's a good one. There's a number of faction ones,
Yep.
like Purifying Rites for the Wild Hunt, Reclaim the Lamentiri for Ilthari.
Yep. Yep. Hold all in one player's territory, right?
Yeah,
So, uh, similar ideas. I don't know necessarily how those warbands are faring for holding objectives right now, but I think it gives them a really good flex option where they can hold
100%.
some, just sort of passively just stand around in some gloom, and then come last power step, they're just like, oh, and I'll just delve these and then score a couple glory off of that.
I mean, I can tell you at 100% consider it in Ripa now.
Yeah.
If in that time where I'm just kind of biding my time, one of those things I can do while biding my time is to walk onto one of the objectives in my territory, and then delve it before the end of the round to pick up an easy 2, and maybe get an Inspire on Ripa,
Yeah. Well, and especially
upgrading him
with
sufficiently.
ranged fighters that you can take advantage of flips with, because
Sure.
it makes the positioning that much easier.
Yeah. And if you're a total psychopath, you can double down on the making a statement by running Steelheart and running Cleanse as well. they have what is a making a statement clone in faction.
Yeah.
So
Back in the day when they were like, yeah, this is going to be a thing that people want to do.
Yeah. It's just crazy enough that it makes me feel tempted, but I know it's probably wrong. I mean, and they have one that's just like they get one for just holding one in enemy territory, so they have kind of a consolation prize one. Anyway, that's there's still movement 3, so good luck.
Yeah, 3 fighters, movement 3. It's probably not happening, but the opportunity is there now, I think.
Yeah, but point being, holding all the objectives, that all is not as daunting as it used to be.
No, and I think in some cases it's almost better than stuff that says hold 2 or 3 specifically, because that's a guarantee that you have to do a fairly large percentage of the objectives, and some of these, since it just says all, it can be 1, and sometimes you just get lucky, and that's your opponent's going to probably feel pretty bad at that point.
Yeah. We talked about some of the Surge's ones, like Arm of the Everwinter, and Astro Matrix alignment. Depending on exactly how those rule determines how those are either like insanely easy, or require you to take some flip stuff, or in the case of the lizards, just use your boss's ability.
Yeah. I mean, I think anymore now for Starbloods, Astro Matrix is a 100% guaranteed include. Like,
sure,
there's just going to be situations where you can just take your first action, score a glory. You didn't do anything other than flip a token. So
yeah. What I also thought was worth mentioning here in the kind of surge category is Prize Beyond Measure, and this is one that somebody's got to have 3 upgrades on them and be holding an objective. And there's a reading of this that says that all the people holding objectives would have to have 3 or more upgrades. I know there's some talk back and forth over whether that's the correct interpretation. That's how I read it.
That's how I read it as well.
But I scored that without too much trouble. You get 3 on Vortimus, and I was already, normally this is like kind of prohibitive for somebody who also wants to be holding lots of objectives, because as you get your other people on, this gets hard. Here you can kind of delve it into a situation where you can score it, and then delve back out of that situation once you're ready to score your end of round objectives. So for me, the value of that went up quite a bit.
Yeah. And that all of these feel like really strong flex options. So like if you're wanting to play aggro, but you need that passive glory, some of this stuff is really easy.
Sure.
I think Arm of the Everwinter is maybe one that people are particularly unhappy with right now, because it's like, oh, did Hrothgorn really need another free glory in his deck?
Right.
But I think it's something to keep an eye out for, especially because right now it's very limited to specific factions. But I think this might be something that they're going to be playing around with. And I mean, watch out, because it might suddenly be a thing.
Yeah.
As a very solid flex option.
Yeah. In the same way that we were talking about power cards, like paying attention to whether they're talking about objectives or feature tokens, there's some objectives out there. And it's a tough time for objectives to have 2 different meanings in this game.
Yeah.
But there's some objective cards that refer to feature tokens, and those are worth looking at, especially since they are often going to be in direct competition with cards that have you hold objectives.
Yeah. Yep, for sure.
I think a great example of that is Treasure Hunters, which is, we were referring to that kind of obliquely before. That is hold 2 in enemy territory to get yourself 3 glory. And that kind of competes a little bit against Fearless Seekers, which is hold 2 feature tokens in enemy territory to get 2 glory. So 1 less glory, but you kind of don't care what the status of those are. You
Yeah.
don't care what they're flipped to.
Yeah, which I think is definitely pretty strong.
Mm.
As a again as a flex option, I think it's pretty good because you don't have to really care about the objective side at all, and you just
Yep.
take advantage of the benefit of just hanging out in a defensive boosting hex, and then also can score off of it. And I think this is kind of a funny parallel to some of the stuff that they tried to do, where it was like, well, if you've got a certain number of fighters standing in lethal hexes, you can score
Yeah.
stuff, and it was just always like,
Test of courage. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
too much. But this, it's
Unless you're a
like,
ghost.
yeah, I
Yeah.
want to be there anyway, so
Yeah. Yeah. And then on top of that, like with this, when you're comparing Fearless Seekers to Treasure Hunters, you got more landing spaces to score this off of because you get to count
Mhm.
those double-sided glooms as part of this. So there's just more opportunities to find a spot with 2. It's hard for your opponent to cover up every possible place. So
Yeah, yeah.
um,
And then I guess just as a quick aside for in faction, Cunning Warfare basically is this as well.
yeah, yeah,
It's feature token or cover hex. I'm not really, I guess, because there's printed cover hexes on the
yep,
boards.
exactly.
And then also in the destruction faction cards, there's scant rewards. So having so it's a hybrid. So I don't think you're ever scoring it off the first one. There are no feature tokens in your territory and in no one's territory. I don't know how
That's
you
a
even mathematically make that happen anymore.
we don't have enough objective destruction in the game left
Yeah, I
to
don't
make
think
that
that's
happen.
actually possible. But the other side, there are no objective tokens on the battlefield. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
okay, that feels pretty good. Um, so another thing, where I mean, it basically just says, you know, is the board state how it was when it was set up? Score
yeah,
2.
yeah. Um, there's a sinking feeling, which is in a similar way to Fearless Seekers versus Treasure Hunters. Sinking feeling is hold more feature tokens. Is
Yeah,
it more feature or more cover?
feature tokens.
It's hold more feature tokens, uh, and you only score 1 glory for it. So um, another comparison, I 1 glory end phase need to be pretty good to get it. I don't have a hard time thinking of the deck that really wants this, but maybe you do take it in a hold objective deck and it's your kind of consolation. And maybe you just kind of score it along with some of your other stuff when you do it. So
Yeah, or maybe if you're just like playing sort of a sit back kind
mm,
of defensive tactics, like
hmm
I mean, the thing that comes to mind is sort of playing the um, dwarves and just sitting back and wanting to have a defensive position to take shots from. But I don't
that's a good
really
point.
know that this payoff's even good enough for that. So,
Yeah,
um, but it is
tough to
very
say.
easy.
Death have an in-faction one. That's Lurking Death. Uh, this is a score 2 glory in the end phase. It's a duel, and they have to have 2 or more friendly fighters, each in a cover hex, and one of them has to be in enemy territory. It is a first for a card where it deals 1 damage to 1 fighter from your warband that is in a cover hex. I think some of the death warbands are 100% okay with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, fine, you can uh, do a damage to the Royal Butcher, whatever, like he was already
Yep.
going to be 1 shot anyway. So um, that one feels pretty powerful. Interestingly, because it's specifically calling for cover and not feature hexes, it does work a little bit counter to holding objectives proper, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, you
uh,
probably don't want this if you're playing hold objectives, right? Because then you have to not have them flipped to the objective side.
mhm.
Um,
um, unless you think you can turn it into like a Sophie's choice for your opponent where they're not sure which way they
which
want it,
which one am
So
I holding?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, and as much as I love those games, it's probably better to not split your attentions. Those are some of my favorite moments in the game, though.
Yeah, no, for sure. Anything else? I
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, we talk about old standbys. There's Path to Victory, right? Like that's
Oh,
there.
sure.
That's in the
Yep.
essentials. That's going to be there the whole time. So hold 2 objectives and have taken somebody. An enemy fighter has to have gone out of action, and that's kind of in direct competition with Lost in Shadow, which is hold 2 objectives and 1 enemy fighter must be in a cover hex. So I
Yeah.
included Lost in Shadow specifically because it's like, well, this is nice. I don't have to roll dice. I don't have to worry about, but I do have to control where the opponent is. And on one hand, you're like, man, people are in cover hexes all the time, so this is not going to be a problem. What I think though is that this is the sort of card, and I think a number of the cards we've talked about here are more powerful in a best of one than they are in a best of three.
Yes.
Because I think you're going to catch somebody out with Lost in Shadow in a best of one, and then it's going to be substantially harder later in the best of three. Uh, there may be an argument to be made that if including this, scoring this on them in the first round, in the first game, and then having them trying to avoid standing in cover for the rest of the game. I mean
Yeah.
that for the rest of the best of three. I mean that's something. And it also makes it easier for you then to get some of your other things, because if they're not standing on objectives and delving them, you've got an easier chance to score some of your other ones. So I mean, again, I'm broken record. I like those head games. So
Yeah. And I think it probably is worth practicing with. Like you say, I think maybe it becomes too hard to score. Like the last thing you want is to slow your deck down. But at the
mm-hmm.
same time, if it's enough of a significant detriment to your opponent, or if it's like so counter to their gameplay that they can't afford not to stand in them, then it's like, well, then I just always score this. And
Sure, yeah.
so, I mean, it's probably going to be a little matchup dependent, but I think it'll probably be it'll be good enough that you could include it. Like I don't think it's probably like 13th card territory where you're like, oh, maybe I just do throw this in on the off
Mm-hmm.
chance that it is a meta with a lot of people trying to stand in feature tokens.
And I think it may become more powerful. There's already quite a few cards that give you benefits for standing in. There's either objectives that are scoring you things for being in cover hexes or
Yeah.
future tokens, or there's cards that just straight up, hey, are you in a cover hex? Well, cool, get this attack benefit. So
Yeah. Yep. Upgrades and
people
plays.
are being incentivized beyond just the defensive bonus for being in there.
Lots of good stuff.
Yeah, one before we move on from cards, I one very relevant comment I want to make that helps holding objectives. There's no distraction left, so if people want to
Yeah.
try to distract you out, they got to go for hypnotic buzz, mirror move, or center of attention. I think are some of the ones that they're going to have to work with.
Yeah. Those are strong options left. And
Yeah,
yeah, no mischievous spirits.
yeah.
Like yeah, there's just a lot of the strong anti-hold objective stuff that
God,
just
do you think if you had mischievous spirits available, would you take it now in a hold objective? Like it's weird because
I would need
it's
to look.
objectives, not feature
Yeah,
tokens.
no,
So
that's right. I was just gonna say I need to check the wording, but you're right. It's objective, so no, I probably wouldn't even take it, even if it was available.
yeah, maybe it's hard. I mean that it has that confusion effect there where you can like take an objective and slide it from under one to another,
Yeah,
but it's tough. Yeah, it's tough. I don't know.
I mean, it would basically only have strong value later in the game, so
Yeah,
that's I don't know. I mean, I guess it's not really worth thinking too hard about. We can't play with
that's
it,
fair.
but it is an interesting thing to even consider. That it's like, oh, well, maybe it's not even wouldn't even be good enough to consider.
Yeah.
Uh, but in that same vein, like, so distraction's gone. Like, yeah, okay, that's rough. That can
Mm.
also be bad for the whole objective factions in this as well, because like
Mm.
and now, of course, with Starblood Stalkers, I didn't really feel this because they do have their
Right.
own in-faction push
They have
options. But
distraction only better.
yeah, because that's what we need. But like for warbands that don't have that, so I most I guess don't have
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe they don't. You've only got your one confusion, and then it's like, oh well, I actually need to get on that hex where that enemy fighter is, and the only way I can do it is if I hit him. And it's like, oh,
Mm.
maybe I can't get the dice to work out for me.
Hmm.
That can be rough, and having distractions was always a good way to just make sure that you could clear those hexes. So that'll be something to watch as well. I mean, distraction goes both ways in a lot of situations. So
Yeah. There's one card I was surprised I haven't seen return, and maybe it's hard to work out the wording on this, but trying to remember. Was it called Master Duelist? There used to be one that instead of a drive back, you could confusion effect, basically. So if you won a combat, you could swap
Mm-hmm.
position. That was in
Yeah.
season 1.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it hasn't been
It has not been reprinted. Cunning Duelist is what it was.
Yep.
And that was if you succeeded in an attack action. So it had to be a success, but you could swap the two fighters' places if they're adjacent fighters. That seems
Yeah.
like there was always like an 11th or 12th upgrade for me, where I was like, yeah, I want this in here, and like, yeah, no, never mind, it's out. But
Yeah, it's an
um,
interesting one because it definitely, like you say, it's definitely one that didn't get a lot of use back then, and I think
mhm,
partially because you just didn't have a good need to do that.
yeah,
Even confusion was not as prevalent until Nightvault, I don't think.
mm,
Uh, but but it definitely would have a place today. I think maybe it's just something they haven't gone back to look at because they're like, that was maybe a design choice that we didn't like from
yeah,
Shadespire, but maybe it's worth revisiting. Who knows?
yeah. I'm gonna see how many tangents I can get us going on cards that are not in the
Sure.
in
Yeah,
the
that we
championship game
can't
anymore.
actually play with right now unless you're
Yeah,
playing
yeah,
the relic format.
yeah.
All right. Well, any other? I mean, as you just said, you're trying to find as many tangents as possible. Any other cards that you would like to talk about before we just move on to some general thoughts for different warbands and wrapping things up?
No, I think that that kind of covers a lot of things that I wanted to hit.
Cool. All right. Well, uh, so I think tangentially through talking through cards, we've kind of already mentioned a number of warbands that are benefiting from the situation right now. Factions like uh, Hrothgorn is in a strong position right now. Starblood Stalkers, it's like you just have some free flip tech uh, for and free scoring off of flipping. Like it's pretty obvious that you'd want to do that. Uh, and maybe we already mentioned a couple that have sort of taken a little bit of a hit. But are there any others that you think are worth mentioning for these changes specifically?
Sure. I mean, I think it depends on what the change is. So what I've seen between things like treasure hunters or making a statement, uh, or any of those, hold all in one territory like purifying rites. Um, any warband that has the ability or an incentive to get into enemy territory, I think goes up in value. So Skaven, which have their ability to bring back fighters on any starting hex, or Grimwatch with the Ghoul Call ability.
Yeah.
Um, those are examples of getting fighters into enemy territory without too much crazy trouble. Um, Examples of people who benefit, who have other incentives, would be like Dread Pageant have God Seekers, 2 glory for end phase for having everybody in enemy territory. So you can kind of double down on some of these things where, like, yeah, sure, I'll try to be in 2 feature tokens in enemy territory because I already want to be in enemy territory.
Mm-hmm.
I think Wraith Creepers have a similar thing for being in or scoring in enemy territory, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Soul Raid have a surge for being in there. So um, I think there is. I think that's one thing. Any of the warbands who are doing that, you want to take another look at. Like, hey, maybe I can lean into some of these hold objective, because there's some very high scoring objective cards for holding feature tokens or objectives in enemy territory, and that's worth seeing if you have a full on build or a hybrid build to help you out with that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's even I guess it's just the one Seeking the Heart for Starblood Stalkers. That's
Mm,
basically that as well.
yeah,
I think you have to be doing it with hunters though. Let me double check that quick. Either way, I guess point is that yes, those cards are all of high value now because it just became that much easier to do that. Um, no, it's just a hybrid. So it's either you have each surviving friendly fighter in enemy territory, or you hold each objective in enemy territory,
mm,
which is actually really good now.
yeah, yeah, solid.
But yeah. So some other warbands that just sort of less in the specifically holding um, sort of vein, but just more generically benefit from these changes are warbands that already were rolling multiple defense dice.
Mm,
Um, so we talked about there's already a benefit to not flipping because you gain defense. If you already just don't really care about flipping and it's just a very easy math situation for you, it's like, well, my defense dice just got 1/6 better. And
yeah,
if you're already rolling multiple dice, it's like the change in defensibility is pretty large. And I think we even got a comment in our Discord of somebody asking just like, how do I deal with this? Like my
sure.
attacks are just not accurate enough anymore.
I mean, right. Like, and it has, I feel like there's almost added benefit for the hold objective, although they are going to be flipping them. So they're the ones who are going to be standing on things that are no longer cover hexes. But in the time leading up to that, if you're a Mournflight Banshee, you're
Yeah.
effectively on 2 block until you decide to flip that to score off of it. So there's that benefit. If you're a faction that it has it naturally or inspires to it or can get there easily one way or the other, then that's pretty tasty
Yeah.
for that.
I guess kind of to go along with this, that it, I mean, not that it's a big deal, but something I just thought of is that, like, if you are a swarm warband that's already taking advantage of supports fairly frequently, you probably don't have to care as much about
Mm,
the defense bonus from Gloom either, because you're already getting a bonus. Now,
sure.
of course, it is the double support bonus, so
It can be tough to get there.
you can,
Yeah,
you could get one supporting fighter to get the one, and then the Gloom to get the two, and
sure.
effectively the Gloom works like a second supporting fighter for you. But
Yeah.
I guess my point is, like, if you're gets and you're just constantly getting supports, maybe you don't have to think about it quite as much. But I think the benefit is just passive to everybody, so
Mm.
it's pretty good if you can take advantage of it. Yeah. Anything else for warbands specifically that you think we should call out for folks?
I mean, I think as we mentioned with the cards, with the demise of distraction, any faction that's got an in faction distraction has an inherent bonus in the hold objective playstyle,
Yeah.
and there's a handful of those. So Spike Claws and Sepulchral Guard jump to mind
Mm-hmm.
with their Mollog's got one. It feels like it was warbands early on. I was going to say, but I mean, we've got the Starblood. They've got a better than distraction.
Yeah.
Dread Pageant have a sidestep slash distraction slash even better than that, depending on how many wounded people are out there. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a uh, if you have that in house, like that has some huge positioning bonuses, which you can leverage in any situation, but especially so in the hold objective playstyle.
Definitely. Yep. Never underestimate the power of push ploys.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so kind of sort through and see if that faction has some of these assets that we're discussing here, and that's above and beyond any of the in faction objectives. We've kind of touched on a bunch of those already.
Yeah, for sure. Any final thoughts? Just generically?
No, just that we'd love to hear. I've only gotten a handful of games in with hold objective style. They were incredibly fun. I really enjoyed doing that and doing the head games of like, do I think this person's got flip? How long can I wait before I start doing this? Like when do I gotta pull the trigger on this? And it was a fun set of problems to think about. So I'm excited to play it more. But like I said, we haven't played a ton of them. If you feel like that there's something out there that a tip or a trick or a consideration that we're not keeping in mind, let us know. We'll put it out there to the wider audience.
Yeah, for sure. This is all new ground. This is why we wanted to make sure we had some time with it before we recorded.
Mm,
And like we don't play nearly as much as some people do. So if you've got if you feel like we are missing something, or if there's just a general knowledge that you've gained through your games, we'd love to hear about it. Or if you just want to chat with us, that would also be
totally.
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, If you decide that you want to get in touch with us for any other reason, episode ideas, feedback on old episodes, anything in general, you can always do that at WTHcast on Twitter or whatthehexcast@gmail.com. If you are interested in checking out any of those old episodes or any of the other content that our podcast group makes, which is all Age of Sigmar related, you can head on over to themortalrealms.com. For those of you who are Warcry inspired folks, the new season is still going for the Dogs of Warcry. I know there was a lot of people who were anxiously awaiting new episodes, and so just want to let anybody know who doesn't realize that they have started again that yes, indeed, there's new episodes. I think one dropped just earlier this week, maybe.
Yep.
Yeah, so you can go check those out. And as always, thanks to everybody who listens, everybody who gives us feedback, everybody who hangs out in the Discord. I guess if you'd like to just come and join our Discord, you can find that information at themortalrealms.com as well, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd love to see you in there, hear from you. Be great. Coming up next, do we have anything to have people look forward to?
We're going to do our usual. I think I might like to talk Arrivals a little bit, but we'll see what
That'd be
pops
cool.
up for us. So,
Sure.
People are pretty positive on that in our local. So,
Cool.
but we'll see what crops its head up in the next couple of weeks here.
Yeah, maybe we'll get a little more information about what's coming. I know
Yeah.
Q1 is all the information we have at the moment,
Yeah,
which is a pretty
right.
broad and generic timeline. But maybe closer to the end of the year, we'll have something else to go off of.
Yep.
All right. Any recommended listening for folks this week?
Yeah, there's Joe Tex. He's a Southern Soul, Muscle Shoals sound sort of guy. He had a hit back in the olden days. Hold What You've Got. That's worth checking out.
Awesome. Well, for What the Hex, I've been Phil.
And I've been Davy. There's an upgrade now that it's like heroic last stand or we're gonna get there. Duke? No, he's not a Duke. What is he? The leader.
Yeah.
So kill both of them, and
Duval.
Prince Duval.
Another one that I noticed, and this is not a ploy necessarily, but it isn't a ploy, is lethal snares. Is that what it's called? It's the objective one or the upgrade one, where whenever you step onto a feature token, you can flip it.
I'm going to challenge you there. What set is lethal snares from?
Oh man, is it not? I thought I was looking at championship. I'm probably not. I bet I have. Yeah, no, you're right. Just forget I said anything because I was not filtering my cards correctly when I was looking at the list here.
Sure.
But nope, never mind.
Yeah, but to that effect, I mean, there was +1 move in the next round for all your fighters. So if you're one of those warbands, like actually interestingly, where I was watching Skylar pull off some pretty cool moves with getting multiple uses out of the Cunning Cruise. What's the boss's name?
More.
It's more something.
Yeah.
That
guy.
Yeah. I guess now I'm going to look it up. But warbands order. Oh, they got them sorted by faction now rather than season. Manok.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. All right.
Nice.
Hour and 27.